Hello again, Americans, patriots. I appreciate the citizens of this country and any place else in the world that would take the time to tune in. I am James Detroit, and I have a few things to share with you. The Epoch Times, in case you do not read it, I would suggest it's a great paper. And I do kind of like holding the paper. I know it gets stuff on your hands. I get it. We really should be, though, talking about hemp. Printing this on hemp paper. We'll get to that another day. One of the reasons why I like reading this paper is right here in Truth and Tradition in our own words. This is Steve Ispis, General Manager of the Northwest Edition. And I'm going to mess up these names in this video because these are foreign to me and I have not heard them pronounced before. I'm Steve Ispis, and I serve as the Northwest Edition General Manager here at the Epoch Times. As always, it's support and faith from readers like us that keeps me going every day, and I can't thank you enough for that. In return, I want to share with you the story of my family and the story of why I'm committed to getting you the truth every week. I grew up in Romania under the former dictator Nicolae Ceausescu, the king of communism, who was executed on Christmas Day in 1989. But before that day, life was bitter. My grandfather belonged to a faction that opposed the communists who took over in Romania after World War II. As punishment, he was sent to a labor camp in Siberia and was a defeated man after he came back. My father, his son, was also blacklisted and forbidden to attend college. I remember my father making the decision for all of us to leave Romania in order to look for a better life. We decided on the United States. He filled out the paperwork and then waited and waited. We would be denied 9 times over the next 5 years. The day before my 16th birthday, my father decided to protest in front of Kusunos motorcade. He did not tell us, so we wouldn't worry. He took a day off from work, and that morning walked to a place where he knew the motorcade would pass in the morning. Once the motorcade approached, he stepped out onto the street with a sign and a few words for the dictator. Quote, "Let us go, respect the Geneva Convention, and approve our application to leave Romania." End quote. He was thrown into jail and told that he was lucky that he was not shot on the spot. He was detained for a few days where he had to sign a guarantee statement swearing not to protest like that again before they released him. I did not see him that birthday, but his efforts seemed to have paid off in the end. After a month or so, we got a phone call from the immigration department saying that our paperwork had been approved. 9 months later, we were on our way to New York via Rome, Italy. I still remember how amazed I was to walk the streets of Rome, as we were not allowed to travel anywhere when I was in Romania. But what perhaps amazed me even more was when I began to read and see that the media of the free world romanticizing the concept of communism, the very thing that my family had fought so hard to escape. Growing up in a communist country, I was fully aware of the fake news published daily by the communist propaganda organs. As time went on, I realized how the corruption of the media has extended beyond communist borders and how fake narratives have become front-page news worldwide. Many true stories were being hidden away as the media cherry-picked facts to spin their own stories. I was then very fortunate to come across the Epoch Times in 2004, when the Northern California edition was just about to be launched. I gladly took the chance of working for a media that was focused on presenting the true stories at all costs, especially stories that exposed the crimes of communism, something that I was so aware of. What motivates me every day is my desire to bring the truth to our readers, regardless of the current hype or narrative, and to see the amazing appreciation of our readers. Though there are still challenges, I look forward to coming to the office every day and working with absolutely amazing people who share this mission to deliver the truth to you. In Truth and Tradition, Steve Ispis. I would say, if for no other reason, that's a an encouraging story. That's a motivating story in order to purchase the Epoch Times. It doesn't have to be in the paper form. You can do it just online as well. But I'm going to flip through and I'm going to read a few headlines for you. It'll start right here on the front page, and it says, Biden backs transgender agenda in sports and bathrooms. And I'm not going to read the whole article, but I want to show you a couple of things. President Joe Biden signed an executive order tasking the government with redefining all its policies and regulations regarding discrimination based on sex to include gender identity, which would mean men who identify themselves as women cannot be excluded from using all services and amenities reserved for women. The order has been welcomed by the activists for transgenderism, but critics argue it erodes protections for women and girls. It remains to be seen how the administration interprets the order in specific cases, but the language indicates that women-only sports, bathrooms, and locker rooms at federally funded institutions will have to be open to biological men who consider themselves female and vice versa. That would include all schools and colleges that accept federal dollars. And if I flip back here to the picture that is provided, and I don't know if I can actually get this to where you can actually see, that is two biological males. Bloomfield High School transgender athlete Terry Miller, second from the left, wins the final of the 55-meter dash over transgender athlete Adriana Yearwood, far left, and other runners in the Connecticut girls Class S indoor meet at Hill House High School in New Haven, Connecticut on February 7th, 2019. This is for the state championship, I believe. Girls are not winning the girls' designated sports. And I know what you say, well, that's just a few places. It's less than 1% of the population. We are damaging girls. And as the father of a daughter, I don't think that's right. So, also in this paper, and again, I like the paper, but it also talks about China's outbreak worsens despite the lockdowns. So if we flip over to page 10, and it gives the wartime mode inside China's current virus hotspots. If we just real quick start thinking about the lies that were told to us, number one, that it came from a bat, it was at some wet market or something else, or a pandolin. The other thing, so now you know what a pandolin is because you didn't know what a pandolin was before because you didn't have any reason to look it up, but now you did, and it didn't matter because it wasn't from a pandolin. They also told us, they gave us the gene sequence, the code, so it would help us, only to find out that it wasn't the actual sequence of this particular virus, or any virus that we know of. And then they said, oh, we've done such a great job. The WHO even told all of us that China has handled this so well in comparison to how Trump and the administration has handled it in America. Turns out we actually handled it pretty well. And now they're having initial or further outbreaks. And of course we don't find out. But then on the front page, again, the front page, the Biden virus response resembles Trump's. Just adds a lot more bureaucracy. So if you actually read the article and you get back to page A8, Biden's virus response mimics Trump's as bureaucracy. Aside from a handful of exceptions, Biden's actions restate predecessor's agenda while infusing pandemic response with equity agenda. There's that word again, because we're going to start seeing a lot of that. Instead of doing it through the White House and a coronavirus task force, really saving money, this president has decided they're going to create an entire, it's probably a 3-letter acronym that stands for some department now that's just been created, and not to be, it'd be the 18th, 19th, or 20th ... that we have now. You know, FBI, IRS, CIA, DHS, TSA, you get it, right? NSA. Okay, so what else do we have here? As we start to look through these things, because there is, what do we have? Oh yeah, the World Health Organization has cautioned experts not to rely solely on the results of the PCR test to detect the CCP virus. The agency says in updated guidance. That's on A5. So if I flip over to A5, again, I really like this. It talks about when you use PCR tests and all these cycles, right? And I have sent some other things out to people in text and stuff, but let me get down here. But it says, hey, the end of the article, the day after the WHO released its new guidance, and it talks about how the PCR tests and what kind of cycles, and basically with this 40 cycles of the PCR test, you can find something. Doesn't mean that you're actually contagious. So you're going to need to have both a positive test with less cycles, and you need to show some symptoms. Hey, I lost my sense of taste. I lost my sense of smell. So to conclude the article, the day after the WHO released its new guidance, Chief Medical Advisor to the President Joe Biden, Dr. Anthony Fauci, said the United States would rejoin the WHO. Quote, as such, I am honored to announce that the United States will remain a member of the World Health Organization, Fauci said. Yesterday, President Biden signed letters retracting the previous administration's announcements to withdraw from the organization, and those letters have been transmitted to the Secretary General of the United Nations and to you, Dr. Tedros, my dear friend, end quote. Tedros is the Director General of the WHO. The United States also intends to fulfill its financial obligations to the organization, Fauci added. In July last year, the Trump administration pulled out of the WHO over its alleged role in helping the Chinese Communist regime cover up the severity of the CCP virus. There have been mixed responses from Congress over Biden's decision to rejoin the WHO. Representative Lauren Boebert, Republican from Colorado, introduced a bill on January 21st to prohibit the availability of United States contributions to the World Health Organization until Congress receives a full report on China and COVID-19 pandemic and for other purposes, end quote. She said in a statement, quote, the WHO is China-centric and panders to Beijing at every turn. There is no reason U.S. tax dollars should contribute more than $400 million annually to an organization that covered for China and failed to contain the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic, end quote. Prior to former President Donald Trump withdrawing from the WHO, the United States was the biggest financial contributor to the health agency, according to the State Department statistics. Kudos to Representative Boebert. She's a freshman, and she's getting it right. And we should all write her, call her, praise her. Why should we put 400 million, or whatever our number is going to be? More than likely, it's going to be more. Why should we be the number one? Why should we be the number one in the United Nations for all of NATO? Why should we be number one? Are you looking back at what the greatest of all time, President Trump, was able to do in the face of all obstruction to be able to make decisions like this? He's the only one in the room that wanted to shut down travel on January 31st a year ago. He's the only one in the room that wanted to pull out of the WHO because all of this swamp and all these people were giving him bad advice. Incredible to me. Now, let me just jump over because on the front page, we also have, I'm just going to throw this in. Trump creates the office of former president in Florida. Now, I chuckle at that because every mainstream media news source was showing you the made up, it was created this past year in 2019, as soon as the election was over, it was created. It was the office of the president-elect, and it looked like an official seal. It looked like it had been something that had been around for years, but it wasn't. It was just created to convince you that this is already happening. So Trump creates the office of the former president in Florida, and I just chuckle because I think it's great. I think it's fantastic. Why not? Just because it hadn't been done before. He just created it. Let's roll with it. I like it. So the other article is the ideological alignment pushing America toward totalitarianism, warns an expert. So the formation of a totalitarian state is just about complete in America, as the most powerful public and private sector actors unify behind the idea that actions to stamp out dissent can be justified, according to several experts on modern totalitarian ideologies. While many have warned about the rise of fascism or socialism in the land of the free, the ideas have largely been vague or fragmented, focusing on individual events or actors. Recent events, however, indicate that seemingly unconnected pieces of the oppression puzzle are fitting together to form a comprehensive system, according to Michael Rechtenwald, a retired liberal arts professor at New York University. Okay, so this is a NYU liberal arts professor. And what he talks about, I think, is very, very powerful. So I'm going to just get through this as quickly as I can, because I'm just going to read sections of it. Is it really totalitarianism? Totalitarian regimes are commonly understood as constituting a government headed by a dictator that regiments the economy, censors the media, and quells dissent by force. That's not necessarily the case in America at this time, but it's also a misunderstanding of how such regimes function. Literature on totalitarianism indicates. To claim power, the regimes don't initially need to control every aspect of society through government. Adolf Hitler, as an example, leader of the National Socialist Workers' Party in Nazi Germany, used various means to control the economy, including gaining compliance of industry leaders voluntarily through intimidation or through replacing the executives with party loyalists. Similarly, the regime rearing its head in America relies on corporate executives to implement its agenda voluntarily, but also through intimidation by online brigades of activists and journalists who take initiative to launch negative public relation campaigns and boycotts to progress their preferred societal structure. If you think about everything that has just happened with this cancel culture and the way, at Goodyear as an example, I'm not going to buy another set of Goodyear tires again. I hope you don't either. Why? Because they made their employees go to training sessions to be able to understand that if you wore Make America Great Again or if you wore Trump 2020 shirt to work, you were offensive. I'm not going to support. That's not an American company. That's not American. To be able to tell me that I can't wear freedom of speech. Dissenting media in America haven't been silenced by the government directly as of yet, but they are stymied in other ways. In the digital age, media largely rely on reaching out and growing their audience through social media and web search engines, which are dominated by Facebook and Google. Both companies have in place mechanisms, algorithms, to crack down on dissenting media. Google gives preferences in its search results to sources it deems authoritative. Search results indicate the company tends to consider media ideologically close to it being more authoritative. Such media can then produce hits pieces on their competitors, giving Google justification to slash the authoritativeness of the dissenters. I mean, just think about this. When people say to me, well, I Google researched it. Yeah, sometimes you got to get to the third, fourth, fifth page before you actually see and find an article that is the truth. That's why I like the Epoch Times. They were really doing investigative journalism, and they are, as this also points out, Facebook employs third-party fact checkers who have the discretion to label content as false and thus reduce the audience on its platform. Virtually all the fact checkers focused on American content are ideologically aligned with Facebook. Okay. Totalitarian ideology. The element that holds totalitarianism together as a composite of intellectual elements is the ambition of fundamentally reimagining society. Oh, have we heard that phrase before? Reimagine society, reimagine law enforcement, reimagine police departments, reimagine, right? Reimagine society. The intention to create a new man, said author Richard Shorten in Modernism and Totalitarianism, Rethinking the Intellectual Sources of Nazism and Stalinism, 1945 to the Present. Various ideologies have framed the ambition differently based on what they posited as the key to the transformation. Karl Marx, co-author of the Communist Manifesto, viewed the control of the economy as primary, describing socialism as socialized man, the associated producers, rationally regulating their interchange with nature, bringing it under their common control, instead of being ruled by it as by the blind forces of nature in his Das Kapital. Flipping forward in this article, the idea is that you have some enlightened party who understand the problem of the proletariat better than the proletariat does and is going to shepherd them through the revolution that they need to have for the greater good, says James Lindsay, author of Cynical Theories, How Activist Scholarship Made Everything About Race, Gender, and Identity, and Why This Harms Everybody. Elements of this intellectual foundation can be found in the ideologies of the many current political forces, from neo-Nazis and anarcho-communists through to progressives, and to some extent, even neoliberals and neoconservatives, Lindsay said. This is why you see so many people today saying that the only possible answers are a full return to the classical liberalism or a complete rejection of liberalism entirely as fatally disposed to create progressivism, neoliberalism, etc., he said. That's not to say these ideologies are openly advocating totalitarianism, but rather that they inevitably lead to it. The roadmap could be summarized as follows. 1, there's something fundamentally and intolerably wrong with the current reality. 2, there's a plan to fix it requiring a whole society buy-in. 3, people opposing the plan need to be educated about the plan so that they accept it. 4, people who resist the persuasion need to be re-educated even against their will. 5, people who won't accept the plan no matter what need to be removed from society. That sounds very much like what they keep telling us. And at the end it says, what is the alternative? It calls for radically reorganizing the world. If calls for radically reorganizing the world are inherently totalitarian, how is the world to avoid them? The question appears to be its own answer. If totalitarianism inherently requires allegiance to its ideology, it can't exist in a society with a lack of such allegiance. The United States was founded on the idea that individual rights are God-given and unalienable. The idea, rooted in traditional beliefs that human morality is of divine origin, stands a bulwark against any attempt to assail people's rights, even for their own good. Rechtenwald said, quote, if you're not a believer in actual God, you can posit a God's ideal on the matter. We have to posit some arbiter who's above and beyond our own prejudices and biases in order to ensure these kinds of rights. Because otherwise, you have this infinitely malleable situation in which people with power and coercive potential can eliminate and rationalize the elimination of rights willy-nilly, end quote. That's a lot of truth in that article. Check out the Epoch Times. Thank you for spending time with me. I hope something that I have said in the last 25 minutes encourages you to take the next step, to speak the truth. Have conversations with people. They might be difficult to start with, but let's continue to talk about what's happening right now. This article sums that up. This whole paper does. I hope you'll reach out and support the Epoch Times as well. I am James Detroit, and for now, I'm out.